Our first speaker today is the leading expert on German online gambling regulations. Please welcome Dr. Jörg Hofmann, past president of the International Masters of Gaming Law, IMGL, head of gaming and betting law practice at Melchers law firm. Jörg, thank you for being here and thank you for sharing the stage with us like last year. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Willem.
And we leave the stage to you for this moment.
Thank you. Thanks for the kind introduction, Willem, and good morning, everybody. It's good to be here again after 1 year and probably even a longer time, having an in-person conference again in Germany. So it's exciting to see many familiar faces. Before I start, I just wanted to comment on the first poll question. I think it was most interesting, but because it said the current regulation, I think that makes a difference. If we take this away and say, will German regulation succeed? I would say the answer could be yes. But now there's reluctancy because there are things that needed to be changed. I think you will all agree with me, and this is something which we like to discuss in the course of this conference. So you may all come with great expectations to this conference. Everybody is excited to learn about where we are in Germany and where we're going to in the near future. And in particular, from the operator side, that's an important question. So what can be better for a keynote was to provide, in a nutshell, a brief overview on German regulation for those of you who traveled far and might not be familiar with the details of our regulation and with the current developments. I tried to provide this information as best as I can, and certainly know that there are some experts in this room who know everything even now, so we're happy to discuss this later. As you know, German regulation is based on the interstate treaty. This is because it's not federal law, it's the legal competence of the German states, the German Länder. And they signed and agreed, 16 German states, one interstate treaty on gambling. The current one came into force on 1st of July, and in combination with its predecessor from 2020, it's offering licensing regimes for sports betting continued, and for the first time ever, a sort of an online casino format, which we call virtual slot machines and online poker. There's also a licensing regime which is going to start, but will be on Länder level, and this, interestingly, is called online casino license, what we usually understand being the license, being the business of an online casino. Here it's limited to table games, roulette, baccarat, blackjack, so the bank holder games. And these licenses can be granted on a state-by-state level, either to a monopoly, to a state-owned or state-run company, or to private operators, but then limited to the amount of bricks and mortar licenses in that particular land. So it's a very interesting combination of monopoly and private market. And we can say that the majority of these laws which need to be passed are still not available. I will touch on this later with a few seconds maybe as well. What are the first steps for an operator to comply with German regulation and to stay in the market? Looking back, we've got what I call the gray market. Operators who are targeting their customers in Germany with no license or with a Maltese license or licenses from other jurisdictions. That was easier to argue if that our operator was based across the European Union, if it was based in a third country. The arguments to protect the business were, of course, not so much available, but this is what happened in the past. Last year, the German regulators and politicians established a system which they call transitional regime, applying criteria under which, if operators comply, they were factually tolerated and deemed reliable for a licensing regime in Germany. The purpose of that transitional regime was to allow the existing stakeholders in the market to be transferred, not losing their customers into a licensing environment. The license application started for virtual slots and online casinos in July as well, but we see no licenses being granted at the moment. It's still pending, and probably it will take a while. First rumors said that maybe in November, first licenses can be granted, but we will have to see how the outcome is. At the moment, to stay in the market and to apply for a license means operators need to be fully compliant. That means they need to apply all these so-called joint guidelines, which were published by the Gambling Committee or by the supervisory authorities of Germany, the heads of those 16, in September last year. And this is criteria which provides some requirements, including restrictions like stake limits, deposit limits, minimum spin duration, all these sort of things, and taken off every sort of online casino game, so no roulette games, and a few more restrictions. If you comply, it's fine. You can offer your games until you get a license. And this will be, hopefully, in the near future. We've got 2 regulators in Germany now. This is very important. If you're familiar with your own jurisdiction outside of Germany, basically, you've got one regulatory authority, like the Gambling Commission in the UK, and it's easy to know, well, this is the person I need to speak to. In Germany, there is the Regional Council in Darmstadt, das Regierungspräsidium in German, which is responsible for conducting sports betting licensing regime and doing supervision for sports betting operators. And horse betting. Betting on horses is another possible licensing regime which you can apply for separately with Darmstadt. And then in Saxony-Anhalt, another German state, in the city of Halle, there's our new regulator, which is will be the joint supervisory authority for gambling, but it's being built up. In the meantime, for a transitional regime, for a transitional period, it's the Landesverwaltungsamt, it's the German term. We can translate it with State Administrative Office. It's a brand new department, number 208. They're starting from scratch with all these civil servants, and they're trying to do their best in order to deal with these applications. And when communication started to be critical in the first time because you couldn't find someone to directly approach, it's now getting better and better. And I would say I have a lot of respect towards these regulators taking such an important and challenging task and trying to fulfill this. So we are expecting licenses being granted from there. And of course, they also look at the market, and they are going to apply sanctions and enforcement very shortly. The industry has been called to submit applications by the end of November latest, or at least giving some binding letters and time frame. And pending applications, those operators were asked to submit, ideally, the complete application by the end of November. This is what we've heard, and this is hopefully what will be feasible for the industry. There are no license granted at the moment, as I said, for virtual slots, but we have, I think, 35 or something license granted for sports betting operators. There's a whitelist published by the Region Council and the Ministry of the Interior in Hesse, where you can look up those names. And they're operating under these licenses. Operators must connect to different various IT server systems. The most famous one is Oasis, which is the centralized player-bearing system. But there are safe server system and limit server system, limit database systems in Hesse and in Saxony-Anhalt, where it's got complicated to access these systems and be connected. And for those of you who've got these problems to solve, one important information which has not really been communicated so that everybody can understand, the limit database, which is the database that applies the deposit limit, which should be cross-operator-wise, as well as avoiding parallel playing for players. The Regional Council asked the operators to be connected by the end of August, when everybody learned it's not possible. Now the information is there is a standard limit, which is deposit limit, which is 1,000 euro, which needs to be applied. This is statutory. Exemptions are possible up to 10 and even 30,000 in a single case basis for players. Operators can grant this with formal approval of the authority. The second tier between 1,000 and 30,000 will not be working cross-operator-wise until 1st January 23. Till then, it will only be monitored and only be exchanged, those data that is linked to the 1,000 euro deposit limit. It's kind of strange, but it's something that has some technical reason, and if we understand that, then the communication with the authorities is better. This was just some advice for those who are dealing with these problems. We're expecting some changes. Unfortunately, not the really significant changes which we're hoping for, but we're expecting some changes when 2023, the new centralized regulator will take over. Darmstadt will then no longer be responsible for sports betting. which is a shame because they're familiar with this business and they had a lot of experience. And the state administrative office will take over, will be taken over by the new authority. So then we have, like the UK, one regulator. The difference to the UK and others is this regulator can make decisions. For instance, this is an operator who should get a license, but to conduct this decision, to apply it, it needs to seek approval of the Gambling Committee, which is a group of 16 regulators. They represent the German 16 states. That makes it not too powerful and delays the process of giving licenses, anything else. I said we have some restrictions. I mentioned a few. It's content restrictions. It's these limits which do make the business not really much compatible if you compare it to the black market. I think this is one of the great challenges we have to solve. The most, I think, significant challenge is taxation. As of 1st of July, a new tax rate, 5.3% applies based on stakes, applies to all the verticals involved. And this is, of course, compared with black market operators, a challenge. We're hoping that this can be changed. There's litigation on the way, but for the time being, this tax rate applies, and it makes it not easy to deal with this. Later today, we will have more information from Dr. Fürich, just presenting whatever needs to be known regarding taxes during these conferences. We've got affiliate marketing restrictions. We've got advertising restrictions, and so on. This will all be presented in further panels. At this point, because 15 minutes are over, I will simply stop and wait and see if there are any questions from your end. Please raise your questions and let me try to ask them.
And please stay with us for a moment on the stage. So first question before we move to any other questions. Which aspect of the current regulatory framework is most urgently, in your opinion, need of a reform? So which part of the regulation?
Every good regulation, every decent regulation aims to protect players. It's responsible gaming, nothing else. We don't look at the financial side of regulation. And if we want to protect players seriously, we need to address the regulation to the players. So I think the most important evaluation is about content and taxes to see that these offerings, which are licensed, are attractive enough for the market. If the player moves outside and plays in Curaçao or wherever, then we might have the best theoretical protective regulation. But if there's nobody who plays within that framework, in that jurisdiction, it's worth nothing. It's below zero. And I think this is very important. We need to compare these figures.
There's some more questions in Slido. Let's have the first question on the screen. I also encourage you, if you have questions during the session or even right now, if it's quick, to post your questions via Slido. At the end here, there's also a question we can take with a microphone in the room. But let's have a look at the first Slido question. It's also in front of you,
right.
Jörg.
Yes, thank you. I do not have to repeat it because you can read it yourself. It's a question finally the regulator will have to answer. The issue is, at the moment, we can see a tendency that the regulator looks at what operators did in the past, and the past means what did they do within the last couple of months, not in 2016, 17, 18, but let's say after the introduction of the transitional regime. And we've got experience from sports betting license applications. If a sports betting operator applied for a sports betting license with the regional council in Darmstadt, and as a multi-channel operator also offered casino games, on the real casino games with no restrictions, they were in trouble and they didn't get a license until they fixed it. And sometimes it's even a discussion, not just among the regulators, but basically within the Gambling Committee, because these 16 regulators, they have very different views. Some are really hardlining conservative and some are more liberal, but they need a majority vote of two-thirds to approve the granting of a license. And it could be an issue if there is no compliance. But finally, and this is just because they look at the reliability of the operator and say those who didn't comply, although they knew they had to, probably in a single case view, maybe will be out of the game. Probably there will be a discussion if there's a cooling off period, whether be excluded for a while, but this has not been decided yet. And we will see how Saxony-Anhalt will deal with these cases, because it's just coming up. They started to look at the applications, and this is a new issue.
Good question, excellent answer. Let's look at the second question from Slido. How do operators prove that they're compliant? Are they to get tested against existing draft regulations? Which body will review the certification report?
Yeah.
It's also in front of you, Jörg.
The body is the relevant authority which grants the license. So for virtual slots and online poker, it will be Saxony-Anhalt. For sports betting, it will be Darmstadt. And you don't have to prove that you are compliant. You simply have to be compliant. The regulator will test, will monitor the sites and review what you're offering. And if they find something which they think is an infringement, this would be a risk. But you don't have to be certified. And by the way, certification, there's technical certification, of course, for random number generators, nothing else. It's a question which comes up very often. But you don't have to comply or certify that you are compliant. It's just they look at your offerings and your concepts. And probably a good example for sports betting operators, there are still some uncertainties about the catalog of allowed betting types or permissible betting types. Until now, the gambling committee, which is responsible, was not able to provide the final list of allowed bets and bet types. And first licenses were granted on 9th of October last year. So the operators have to find out what they think, together with their lawyers, is compliant with what the law says. And then we had discussions about esports, mixed martial arts, where the view of regulators is completely different to the industry's view, and this is an ongoing process.
Great. Time for a quick last question. Let's have the third question from Slido, please, Wouter. When will it be possible to connect to the system requiring the 1K limit across all operators? Last quick question.
Yeah, this is possible right now. You can connect to the Lugos limit server, and you are required to submit your data, which is deposit and the player limits. You may receive an error code, which is F1010, if the deposit exceeds the 1,000 euro. The regulators tells you, please ignore it and submit the individual limit, if there's one which is granted. It makes no really sense to me, but for the 1,000 euro, it's possible, the system works. There are, I think, 6 or 7 operators already, sports betting operators already connected. But as far as I know, they're not really submitting any data that's just connected. The regional council in Darmstadt told me, and I think this is a reliable information, after they have set some deadlines, they will, for the time being, set no more deadlines until this is all certain and fixed, because the communication, exchange of information was not always in an optimal way. So at the moment, they are satisfied if the operator is just connected to the test account system, until further notice. I think that's interesting. And we learned that the 2 people in Lower Saxony, which deal with Lugas, they are approachable. If you get them on the phone or write them emails, they're trying to do their best to provide the required information.
Excellent. Jörg, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you
for your speech,
for
for answering your questions. And I'm sure Dr. Hofmann will be around in the coffee break if you have any additional questions.
Coffee break, beers at the bar, and wherever you like to see me.
Soon.
I'm happy to talk to you.
Thank you, Jörg.
Thank you.